I recently came across a novel by Yukio Mishima called The Sound of Waves. It's his novel from 1954, and unlike many works of literature that I've been reading recently, this one kind of spoke to me in a very different way. It's a novel about a young fisherman who falls in love with a girl from a rich family. His name is Shinji, her name is Hatsue, and they fall in love. But her father is not very keen on giving his daughter to a poor fisherman. So Shinji has to prove his prowess and his masculinity and his mm, he needs to prove to the father of his girl that he's capable of sustaining a family in a traditional way with his daughter. He needs to prove himself as a hero, and he does so through the course of the novel. And of course, the ending is happy. And this is probably what bothered me so much about this, because while reading it, and once I was done, I realized that this is one of those novels you don't really get to read that much nowadays. Because nowadays, the novels are always about, mental issues and sexual perversions and just the most disgusting things imaginable. And it always ends really badly, or it ends with the protagonist somehow surviving, but everyone else just fucking commits suicide or something like that. And it's really an interesting contrast. Seriously, if you're right now reading some modern work of literature, something that's renowned and praised upon, or whatever, or something that uncovers some sort of a problem in society, like one of those novels about black slums or whatever, just go to the library, or I don't know what sort of a society you live in, but if you live in a more advanced society, I guess just get it off Kindle or something. Get this book, Sound of Waves, and read it, and you'll probably feel the same thing I felt when I read this book. It was something just so profoundly different and beautiful and enlightening in a way, because it's so different from the kind of works that you're exposed to nowadays. It, it the way Mishima describes this whole love scenes and acts of affection and romance, and he's doing it without being trivial about it, right? Because you could always go out there and get some cheap Pulp Fiction novel about romance and I don't know, Barbara Cartland tier stuff. It's not the same. It's just not the same. If you read this book, you'll realize how different the descriptions of this intimacy, this absolutely the most beautiful things you can imagine, actually are. And the way he sets up his motifs is by using nature. He constantly uses nature. He describes nature in such a descriptive manner, but not in a way that he would be annoying about it. No, no, no. The nature is very descriptive. These descriptions are long, but they are enjoyable. These descriptions are incredibly enjoyable, and they really make you imagine the sort of world he talks about. And they are the essential part of his story. It's the way he paints it is sort of like that Burkean concept of sublime, It's absolutely it's fantastic, and that's why it's so different, because it describes nature as beautiful. It sends a message of being strong and resilient and having a goal in life, and it ends on a happy note. So basically, it violates the three key rules of modern writers. Don't write about heterosexual love, don't write about happy endings, don't write about something that's not completely vulgar or perverse. You may as well say, "Oh, you're such a fucking bigot," or you may as well say, "Oh, so ignorant." I mean, you can say that, but then again, I used to study literature, so I was exposed to people that thought highly of themselves for being literary critics or writers, or and so on and so on. And none of those people really fascinated me. They all just seemed like this utter degenerates that have nothing to contribute to society, and their works were just pointless garbage. And I really uncovered that while reading books like this Mishima novel. Because at one point, these people, this sort of, literary critics elite, just lost all contact with their readers, with people that love literature on a profound level and yet are able to apply it to their daily lives, are not just reading it for the sake of reading it like it's another bourgeois activity, like going to the opera to watch people defecate and spill blood or whatever, whatever postmodern garbage they feed you in theaters nowadays. I don't think that's the purpose of it. The whole point of art should be to lift up a man's spirit, not put it down, and yet it always fills with modern literary works that are considered mainstream and good and noble, that all they do is try to demoralize you. For example, one of the books that's been really pushed on us in my literature classes back then was this novel by a Jonathan Little, and it was called The Kindly Ones. And it was a novel about, I mean, if you're really into literature and also into sexual deviancy, then you probably know which book I'm talking about. It's a book about a Nazi that's a homosexual, and yet he's also in love with his fucking sister. And it was so painful to read, and it was so excruciatingly demoralizing, and it was so humiliating, and there was just nothing to it. Some professor that's closed in her or his echo chamber may as well identify that as the greatest literary work of our time. They can, sure. I could also take a book that I like and describe it as such, but it doesn't make it so, and shouldn't make it so. I think that people that are considered authority on art nowadays are just considered that for the sake of being considered that, not because they would actually be any authority on art. They simply forgot about what art aspires to. They didn't really interpret art in a much more ancient context. They just interpreted it in this modern, pointless, I don't know, just in this idea that the garbage that they're feeding us nowadays is somehow good. It's not. It's just so painful to read. So I was really glad when I got this Mishima novel. It was really something, because I've also read some other works of his. I read some short stories, some of them tragic, and again the difference is so evident, because the way he describes something tragic and people that are struggling with that strategy is so more profound and emotional, and it really does awake it will awake this catharsis in you in a way that no modern writer can anymore. because modern writers, even when they write tragedies, you can sense the message. You can see the message because it's always about some, some homosexual, homophobic shit or some fucking racist shit or some, I don't know, female struggles. Like, it's never really about just the life, just being human. It always has to have this agenda behind it. Like I had a schoolmate in college that a female schoolmate that has just recently got her first novel published, and her novel was about how she gets a job at some restaurant ran by minority group, and she's a and she gets into it filled with fucking stereotypical no the this stereotypes about them and this racist notions in her mind, and then she realizes that nothing is like that, and then some minority chad seduces her or something like that. I don't know. I just read what she said about it in some interview, but that's something that bothers me. The reason why her novel was published was precisely because it fights the bigotry or something like that, not because it would actually be good, just because it fights bigotry. That's something that bothers me. And also it bothers me because she and leftists like her project their racist notions onto other people of their kind and sort of hint at we're all just fucking racists and we're treating these minorities so badly. Well, no, they don't bother me, they just bother you, or you get these preconceived notions about them in your head, and then you're told in college or in high school that those notions are bad, so you feel bad about yourself. You basically hate yourself. It's so goddamn stupid. If only they would leave something alone. Just one thing. This really bothers me about how politics just got into every fucking pore of every aspect of human existence, of human society, even in art. Just the idea that activism can be art is so stupid to me. Because the art should be something honest, something pure, And I'm not alt-right, dude. I'm not some fucking racist or whatever, but I do agree with, people like Paul Joseph Watson. Modern art is absolute crap, and I think that is the most evident here on the level of literature. That maybe because I studied literature, maybe. But it really bothers me, and I'm so glad that I get to enjoy books like Mishima's novels. I've also read Confessions of a Mask, and this actually feeds into my last point. The way this woman wrote a book about racism in a fucking restaurant. Yukio Mishima wrote a book about homosexuality, about his struggle with homosexuality in a form of this character of his, this really weak and sickly boy during the war. And you can clearly see that the way he wrote it, he didn't have any gay agenda, no LGBT shit. He wrote it because he wanted to express himself and admit to himself this side of him, this homosexual side of him that he was, a bit ashamed of. And what they do about, and he wrote it basically just for that purpose. He didn't write it because he wanted to, send a message to society, to be political. He didn't write it for that purpose. And you can see, and it's such an honest book, and it doesn't force anything on you. It doesn't force a fucking political message on you. It just tells you a story of a man struggling with his sexuality. That's it. But you know how I got this book? It was in a it, it was published in a fucking collection that's been designed only for, authors that are members of LGBT. And that actually hurt me. That did hurt me. Because they use these past authors, their works, and they pervert them and they repackage them to sell for their own political agenda. And that's what I find so wrong with modern literature. And I'm honestly afraid for the future. Because I think these times are probably the only times in history where people are so insanely obsessed with their political views, especially leftists, that they would perverse and subvert democracy, and they would do it by any means necessary, and they would also perverse and subvert old art, works of art such as this Mishima novel, and they would most definitely edit it to send their own message. Because this is something I'm really afraid of, that at one point they're just gonna, because there are so many of them, you don't even know because you never studied literature, most of you probably, but there are so many of them, actual political activists posing as, critics or authors or professors. And I can guarantee you that at one point they're just gonna take all these old works and say, oh, you know what, this excerpt is homophobic, this excerpt is racist, let's get rid of this. And they're gonna go in there and they're gonna censor, destroy, and burn these books. It's just gonna be like Fahrenheit 451. I guarantee you, it's gonna happen, and I'm really afraid of that. But yeah, I'm just ranting at this point. I'm just venting my frustrations at the modern era. But yeah, I'm actually gonna read another book by Mishima. I'm gonna read After the Banquet next. I just wanted to say this about this book and the state of literature and just my general thoughts on it. So thank you for listening, and if anyone is listening, I'm probably gonna shield this video on Twitter. If anyone is listening, left me a comment or something. Maybe we can talk about this further. Cause I love literature, man. I really do. But the things that they make you read nowadays are just so, just nothing. And this is an obvious reason why literature is almost dead at this point. Why there are so few people still left that read, especially in young generations. But if there were more books like this, if there was some sort of a new literary wave of, just this intimate message of intimacy and beauty and sublime and something that lifts up human spirit, rather than this end of postmodernist era of literature, which by the way wasn't that bad. Postmodernism was actually pretty good for literature, but it's not anymore. It would be really nice if we could achieve something great again. So yeah, thank you for listening and take care.